I'm all by myself, but I won't be for long. Brian Neubert will join us. In fact, he is on the line here. This is Golden Black Live, Big Ten Tournament edition, I should say. We'll have Jack Carl on segment 2. Tom Dienhart will join us also for segment 3. Brian, on his way, or actually he is in Chicago, I know he is, for the Big Ten Tournament. And Brian, I don't need to welcome you to the show, but I will say welcome, because this is part of the deal. But great to have you. And are you still at the hotel, or are you making your way to you're not making your way to the United Center till a little bit later this afternoon, I assume?
Right, I'm still in the general vicinity of the hotel. So
Okay,
I'm going to work my way over there in a little bit.
Well, yeah, and I don't know how close you're following Michigan State, Ohio State. We're competing head-to-head with that. We're killing them in the ratings, I promise.
I'm sure we are.
But Ohio State was pretty nip and tuck in that game. It was a tight game about 5 minutes into the second half. All right, Brian, Purdue gets Minnesota, and you were just up 10 days or so ago up in Minneapolis. The Golden Gophers, a very, very hard-fought win over Penn State last night. Not surprising it was that way, an overtime game. Just your general feelings about what we might see tonight, from a Purdue perspective, but also a team that has given Purdue troubles, Minnesota, in 2 games this year.
Yeah, I don't think Minnesota was the better team last night.
Yeah,
that's what stands out about the game against Penn State last night. If I recall correctly, I don't know how much Minnesota led prior to the last couple of minutes when they closed regulation on that 10-2 run, but just kind of watching it with relatively divided attention, it seemed to me like Penn State was the better team, and Minnesota just closed the game strong and then won it in overtime. Purdue simply has to keep them out of the open floor. I mean, there's an 80-minute body of work here for Purdue against Minnesota, and it reveals a very obvious key for Purdue, and that's just to keep Minnesota out of transition. I know that's easier said than done. I know that's what Minnesota does. It's not like Purdue is just accidentally letting Minnesota out in transition. Minnesota is doing it. That's its style. That's its system. But the more Purdue can do to keep them out of the open floor, if it can do that, it's going to be fine, most likely, because I do think Purdue is the better team. But they do have to keep Minnesota out of the open floor. They have to keep Minnesota off the offensive glass. If they can do those 2 things, I would have to think they're in pretty good shape. Purdue was, it's been kind of a complicated 2-game series here with the Gophers because, Minnesota was good enough to be up 13 with 14 minutes to go in a building Purdue didn't lose a game in this year. And then Purdue, if they had just played a little bit better in the final 8 minutes of that game in Minneapolis, they would have done it to Minnesota twice. They would have come back from a significant deficit to win twice. That being said, Minnesota was good enough to be up double digits in both of those games. But the causation of that is clear. Purdue's just got to keep them out of the open floor. They've got to play smart on offense. They have to share the basketball on offense. They have to take good shots. They have to get back on defense when opportunities present themselves to do that. And if they do those few things, I think they'll probably be in pretty good shape tonight.
It's interesting, and you're right, Penn State led for the majority of that game, and really was a product of a couple, I'm not one to complain about officiating much, but really a couple bad calls against it late in the game, and very reminiscent to the Purdue call, last second play with Grady Eifert as well. And, you look at the way Amir Coffey, who only had 6 points until the final 6 minutes of regulation, ends up with 22, and of course Jordan Murphy. This is a team, though, that again, you want to keep them under wraps, so to speak. You have to wonder the motivation too. Who will have the more motivation tonight? Just because Minnesota's clearly punched its ticket now, I think it's safe in the NCAA tournament. Purdue has some things to prove, but might not be able to improve its lot all that much in the NCAA tournament. How do you view that, and how do you view Big Ten tournaments in terms of that? In terms of what teams really have to play for these days, if you're not on the bubble, that is.
Well, I might kind of diverge on this a little bit from what fans might think, but I think you want to either win the thing or get the hell out of there as fast as possible. If you're secure in your place in the NCAA tournament. There's really not much to be gained from playing 2 games in this sort of thing, unless you have to play your way into the NCAA tournament, unless you are clearly in a position where you can really hurt yourself from a seeding perspective or really help yourself from a seeding perspective. Purdue is in none of those positions. I think Purdue is very well established as a 3 seed. I don't know if there's really anybody out in front of them that they could lose to that would change that. I don't know if there's anybody out in front of them that could necessarily help them move probably from the fourth 3 up to the last 2. I don't think that's reasonable. So I really don't know what Purdue can get out of this other than a championship if it wins it. If it's not going to win it, then I really don't know what you have to play for. Obviously, you want to stay sharp the best you can, but I don't know if that's as big a deal this year because we're back to the normal schedule where it's only a week between the conference tournament and the NCAA tournament, unlike last year where it was the extra week in between. I guess what my point is, just stay healthy, try to play well, try to go into the NCAA tournament with a positive feeling about yourself, not that Purdue would have any reason not to, and just don't get hurt.
Yeah, it's interesting because Tom Izzo certainly did some of that as well in the first game. Of course, Michigan State leading Ohio State by 6 right now, with about 12 minutes to go in the second half. But I just noticed, and of course, he put Nick Ward in the game because Nick Ward needs some work. It's his first significant time since coming back, and that has been a situation too that. But Cassius Winston, he's rested. Foster Lawyer has gotten a fair amount of playing time, or at least the part of the game I saw. So I think that's an interesting philosophy because your coach never wants to. You want to stay sharp, but only up to a point. If you're Purdue, is there any, from a fatigue standpoint? I mean, what do you from a working on your team perspective? I guess I should say, what can Purdue gain? You know, what do you want? Do you want to see Travion Williams continue to play well? Obviously, if you're Purdue, but what are other little nuanced things that you might say? Well, we can get some good work done even if we don't win this thing. We being Purdue.
Yeah, I think that probably lies in Carson Edwards. I mean, we've been saying it all year. I've been saying it all year. Fans don't agree with me sometimes because they think I'm being negative. Whatever.
Yeah. You'll have to get over that. They'll have to get over that too.
Purdue has so much from a usage perspective tied up in Carson Edwards that you're extremely vulnerable when you get into single elimination play. If 6 of 31 happens in the NCAA tournament, you're exposed, man. Your season's on the line. Yeah. And I think Purdue won the Big Ten in February with the back-to-back wins at IU and Nebraska. I think those were the 2 games that were the difference between Purdue winning the Big Ten and Purdue not winning the Big Ten. And look what those games had to come down to. Yeah. They had to come down to Matt Harms making a play that you make probably 2 times out of 100, and Grady Eifert making a couple plays that you probably don't make 6 times out of 10. And they came down to luck. Yeah. And do you want your season coming down to luck? You absolutely do not. That's not a stab at Carson Edwards and his inefficiency this season. That's a stab or a statement about what Purdue is built on this season and kind of the things they've had to overcome at times. When you look at when Purdue's lost, it's been a situation where Carson Edwards has been really, really inefficient. There have been situations where Purdue's won when he's been really, really inefficient, but a lot of things have had to fall in place that you don't want to have to rely on to happen when your season's on the line. My point is that they need to move the basketball. They don't need one player taking 31 shots. They don't need one player going 4 of 24 on that sort of night. They need to move the basketball. When you look at the supporting cast, you've got 2 of the 3 best three-point shooters in the Big Ten this season, and you've got the guy who led the league in field goal percentage, in Matt Harms. You've got weapons around him. You've got a winning infrastructure around Carson Edwards. When he moves the ball, he weaponizes it. He uses the attention he draws against people. When he doesn't, you play right into that to that attention's hands. And it's been such a mixed bag on that front this season that it really, really makes Purdue vulnerable going into single elimination play here in the postseason. So I guess that's sort of the biggest key to me in the postseason. It's just for Carson Edwards to play a certain way, the way he maybe didn't play at times on the road in some of the games Purdue wasn't very successful in.
And an update, and an excellent point. I think that's an interesting storyline, very unique that you have that with your leading scorer, that you have to, he has to do it in a certain way. I think for Purdue to gather its most effectiveness. Michigan State up by 8 now, and by the way, Foster Loyer has 14 points in this game. By the way, Brian, he has only scored 2 in the last 6 or 7 games. That is always an interesting dynamic on Tom Izzo's. It seems like it's always an interesting dynamic that somebody comes out of the woodwork. Talk about Purdue in the Big Ten and NCAA tournaments in terms of that guy that you might, Purdue's lineup has been pretty secure and you kind of know what you're getting, but who's a guy that maybe needs to emerge or needs to fill a gap outside of Carson Edwards as Purdue goes this tournament? I mean, is it as simple as an Aaron Wheeler or somebody that comes in and does something that they haven't been doing as much of late? Wheeler being maybe an example of that. But how do you view that? Is there somebody that's an X factor that you say, boy, if this person could step up in the tournament, it's going to make a huge difference for Purdue?
Yeah, I would say it would be easy to say Travion Williams, just because they're a different team when he's established offensively and he's playing well. But I would just say big picture. I would just say everybody else, because the way I've been kind of articulating it lately has been, and I wish these words had come to me earlier in the season, but Purdue has put a really effective winning infrastructure kind of around Edwards, and it's up to him to use it.
Yeah. When
Purdue is moving the basketball, when Purdue is getting good threes for Eifert, getting good threes for Klein, getting good threes for Sasha Stefanovic, who very quietly shot 42% from three-point range in Big Ten play this year, when they are getting the ball inside Travion Williams, when they're getting the ball in screen and roll from Matt Harms, they're pretty good.
Yeah.
When the field goal total for Carson Edwards starts getting into the mid-20s and high 20s, that can't not be a situation where everyone else is kind of moved off to the side a little bit. And I think the way you've seen Purdue play offensively a little bit lately, Minnesota notwithstanding, because Minnesota was one of the more egregious examples of the tunnel vision. I think the way Purdue played offensively at Northwestern is a great model. I know Northwestern's Northwestern, but the 5 assists Carson Edwards handed out were every bit as important as the 20-some points, whatever it was he scored. I know he was only 6 of 18 from the floor, but when he moves the basketball, he attracts so much attention. That's where so much of his value lies. And there have been situations almost this season where it's almost like the aura of Carson Edwards is a better player than Carson Edwards. But both of them exist simultaneously. And when the real Carson Edwards uses the aura of Carson Edwards to his advantage and to Purdue's advantage, Purdue is pretty damn good. And that's kind of what I would say in terms of what has to happen in the postseason. Purdue just needs an empowered entirety of its team, and it's up to Carson Edwards to make that happen. It really is. I know that's an unfair burden to put on one player, but that is the burden that comes with being a great player. That's what Carson Edwards has established himself as.
Time for 1 or 2 more questions. No Joel Eastern, obviously, has made a huge impact, and you've written a lot about his ability to get to the rim. We see a photo of him defending against Ohio State. But this is a guy that may not get enough credit for what he's done for this team. But talk about that and his role. He's obviously challenged offensively. We get that, at least in shooting the basketball, although his percentage hasn't been bad. But what is he a guy that can be somebody that in the NCAA tournament, once you get out of Big Ten play, that can be that X factor as well?
Well, on short notice, in terms of preparation time, I don't think people who are going to play Purdue in the NCAA tournament have seen a point guard who turns into his team's power forward on offense. And that's exactly what's happened. I mean, Purdue has done such a good job creating this mix, such a good job with this role reversal stuff that happens on offense where all the pieces fit together. Everybody talks about no Joel Eastern can't or won't shoot jump shots. he doesn't have to, because he's got 3 or 4 guys around him who can do that. And when they're doing that, he's at the rim with a 6'1" guy on him that has no interest whatsoever in boxing out and can't box him out even if they wanted to.
Yeah.
What he's been able to do on the offensive glass has really been of enormous value to Purdue offensively, and almost won the Minnesota game for him a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
In terms of his offense, I think you've also seen a Nojo Leafstrom who's way more aggressive off the dribble, way more confident getting to the basket, way more confident getting to the rim, and you can't tell me that's not a product of his improved foul shooting. You can't tell me if he still had the thought in the back of his head that he doesn't really want to go to the foul line, he'd be playing that way. But he is. And I think the way they use him offensively, too, kind of stationed at the corner to be able to attack on the baseline when an opponent brings in a second defender from the wing to try to close off the lane for Carson Edwards. I think Purdue has done a great job putting him in positions to contribute offensively however he can, with his skill set being what it is at this point in time. But also, he's obviously been an absolute game changer from a defensive perspective. He's one of the best painters ever had already, and he's had some really good ones from a defensive perspective.
Yeah, it's been a huge difference in terms of what he brings, and he is a unique, very, very unique player. That is a given. So you expect, I know you haven't come out and said, but if Purdue survives tonight, it'll likely get Michigan tomorrow. Again, both teams very secure in their spots in the tournament. How do you think, and based on what you've seen or watched so far in this Big Ten tournament, Nebraska's still alive. Obviously the Cornhuskers have a lot to play for, but this will be Game 3 for them tonight, or this afternoon as well. But any other dark horses that you see in this tournament that you say, if you were a betting person, you'd like to put your money on so-and-so to win the tournament?
I like the way Iowa played last night. I know they were only playing Illinois. I know Illinois is very flawed, very young, but the way they kind of turned it on there in the second half, the way Wieskamp is playing, the way Tyler Cook played last night, they might be one to kind of keep an eye on here. I don't know if I'd necessarily pen them in past Michigan, but that being said, Michigan's really good. Yeah. I'm just looking for somebody who's nobody would expect to win the Big Ten tournament who might. Other than that, I would think it would be one of the 3 top teams, whether it be Purdue, Michigan, or Michigan State. I do think from Purdue's perspective, I still feel like this team overachieved all year long and kind of maxed out what it's capable of. So I don't know, both for the Big Ten and NCAA tournament, I don't know what Purdue's ceiling is, because I just feel like they've had to find a way so often late in the season that kind of stuff sort of catches up with you at times. But in terms of the Big Ten tournament, I would think Purdue will be okay today. If they run into Michigan tomorrow, we'll see. But I wouldn't put it past Iowa to knock off Michigan either.
Yeah, interesting, and that's a good call on Iowa because nobody's picking them to win, but they were very, very impressive last night. So, all right, Brian, be safe out there. Have safe travels to the United Center. I hope you, at least from a work perspective, I guess it would be good to get to Sunday from that standpoint. I don't know if it is from your work perspective, because obviously all the coverage of the Big Ten, not only the Big Ten tournament, but the NCAA selection on Sunday as well, will be on the site. So travel safe, and thanks again. So we will take a 2-minute break, and we will bring in Jack Carl and talk about some great his experiences as a host of the officials and over all these years, and he's been around Purdue basketball a long time. We'll look forward to chatting him up here shortly. We'll be back in a couple of minutes on Gold and Black Live.